Hey everybody, thanks for joining us today. I'm Eric Schlissel, CEO of Curate. With me today is Gahrey Ovalle. Are you the executive director of LICC, or what's your actual title?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Eric. Thank you. And it is a pleasure to be here with you.
Pleasure.
So I am the president of the Long Island Cannabis Coalition. And that kind of came about after we got our approval and our license in April of this year. We quickly recognized Long Island needed some help, and those of us who were here should probably get this thing going. So
Amazing.
definitely
So
president of the coalition.
I love it. So for context, Gahrey has a CAURD license and has been unable to open his location due to all of the different stuff going on in New York. But let's put that aside for a second. Let's talk a little bit about how you got here, Gahrey. How did you end up as the president of LICC?
Yeah, sure. That's a pretty interesting story. Ultimately, when we got our license in April, we were super excited, right? And we recognized, my goodness, we're one of the chosen few. We're going to immediately reach out to everybody who was awarded a license in front of us, and we're going to ask them for help and reach out our hands, and they're going to pull us up to where they are, and we're going to pick up speed and pick up intensity and skip some steps because they're going to make it easy for us. And what we quickly learned was that everyone who was here on Long Island was in exactly the same mud that we were stuck in. And as a result, we quickly started to recognize there are problems here that people aren't talking about and the state needs to resolve. But more importantly, there are problems specifically to Long Island that the rest of the state is not seeing. And we really needed to work together to get through it. So we saw that those things were some issues facing us immediately. I was asked by by Hugo Rivas, who is the co-founder of the coalition, and he had asked me on a couple occasions, "Hey, Gahrey, I think we should really put something together, and we should do something, create a coalition." And I said, "Absolutely not. Do you know how much work that is?" So he asked me again, and I said no a couple times until eventually I was sitting down in a conversation in a Zoom call, and I was kind of doing multitasking, doing a couple things at once, and I heard I second that. And I said, "All right, guys, what are we seconding? You just became president of the coalition. We seconded your, we first and second voted you into the president, and you're now leading us, and let's get this going." So that's how I became president, right?
Congratulations.
Um, and I said, "All right, guys, look, if we're going to do it, it's just a very quick stipulation. We have to do it in all honesty and capacity, and we has to be about something more than just us, right? That's what's going to keep us here." I've done a lot of coalition work with a lot of different coalitions in New York, and one of the things that is surefire way to fail is everybody, kind of joining in the same fight in the same direction for their own purpose. Eventually you meet your purpose and there it is, you fade away, and all of a sudden there's a vacuum at leadership again. So we had to create something that was bigger than us, and as long as it was about that, I could definitely take part in it. And sure enough, I think that's also led to our success, because it isn't just about our own individual benefit, but the movement and collaboration of the cannabis business community here in Long Island as a whole.
I love that. So, a lot to unpack there. Firstly, you do have a lot of experience that's relevant to the position you're in, which I'm sure serves you very well in terms of communicating with the OCM and communicating with other stakeholders and bringing it all together. So, I can see why they elected you without your
Yeah.
consent. Makes sense.
Exactly right. Yeah. And it does. It's certainly come in handy. It just allows us to, I guess, to navigate a little bit easier some of
Yeah.
these conversations, creating some of these relationships, and more importantly, diving right into the work of it. I think with most coalitions, with most nonprofits, these are labors of love. Right, you're doing the work because you care about the people and the community, and it isn't really so much about the final result that you're getting out of it. And you just have to be committed to that. So I recognize what that was in a lot of different spaces. I understand what that is to get into the work of it and not necessarily be compensated or appreciated, right? You just get in and do it because it's the work that needs to be done.
I get that. Could you paint the picture of how where Long Island stands now. Having grown up on Long Island, I want nothing more than for everybody to smoke more weed or ingest more cannabis in any way they possibly can. Everybody needs to calm down. So I would really love to hear. I know that there's 3 or 4 towns that allowed it, like Southampton and Roslyn, maybe, or Syosset. I don't really remember. Can you just paint the picture of the landscape, number of licenses, and so on?
Yeah. So Long Island currently, I think it's home to about 63 or 64 of the licenses, right, that have been awarded in New York, 460 something in total, right? Um, Out of those, one currently is actively open, and it is currently the leader in New York in terms of production and sales. We have four townships that have opted in, and that's probably the greatest problem here on Long Island. Um, Up to it's almost about 90% now, that the towns in Long Island have decided to opt out of cannabis retail. So those four townships are really major for us to open up, and that's Babylon, Brookhaven, Riverhead, and Southampton. And of those four, there's only one real town, one real opportunity in which we can open up, and that's in the town of Babylon. They are offering our members and our licensees on Long Island the opportunity to open up and actually find locations, whereas Brookhaven and Riverhead, technically, right, according to the language, right, of their restrictions, there's space for us to find a location to open up, but ultimately it's in such a sliver that these aren't very good locations, right? And this, at the end of the day, this is a business decision. You're not doing me a favor. I have to spend hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to get this going. I don't want you to sit there and tuck me in the back corner of the back corner. And that's currently what's happening right now on Long Island. We are allowed to open and operate inside of industrial and light industrial areas. And as a result of going to the building departments here, oftentimes they want us to upgrade those areas to retail spaces. And it's absolutely absurd, for us to do that in any real capacity. They have to come to terms that we are retail business and we belong in retail zones. And when they start to get us into that space, that's when we'll start doing much better. But right now, we're extremely limited. We only have the four towns. Of those four towns, only one is really giving us an opportunity. And again, just highlighting the one store that's open now in the town of Babylon, in Farmingdale specifically, Strange Stars is their name. They are doing exceptionally well. The best producing dispensary in New York, and one of the best in the nation.
Well, that makes sense. Again, they're right next to, but Adventureland. What's the name
Yeah,
of the? Yeah.
eventually
So
land out that way.
I mean,
Listen, it's a beautiful area. It's wonderful. It's easily accessible. It's very visible. We need more locations like that. Long Island has a tremendous appetite. That was the one thing that Long Island was waiting for. They were waiting to see, what does cannabis retail look like. In December of 2021, the state asked them to opt in. To opt into to cannabis retail, and the reality is, no one knew what that looked like at all in any capacity.
how could they?
Yep.
So it sounds like townships are your biggest obstacle, regardless of the locations that you have. Like, let's be clear, it seems like they're putting up some barriers to entry even after they said yes. So your strategy is what, revolved around getting more towns to open up and getting these to loosen up that are already open. Talk through your strategy and what the, not only who are you approaching, but how are you approaching them, and is it working?
Yeah, for sure. Our strategy is a major, major issue here on Long Island. Like I said, Long Island had problems that were unlike the rest of New York. And the reality is that Long Island is a state unto itself inside of New York. So the rules are different. They're a lot more conservative than the remainder of the state. And as such, there is a tremendous amount of resistance, especially at the leadership level here in Long Island. And that's where we're seeing that disconnect. At a constituent level, maybe 70% of Long Island wants access to cannabis, right? At the 21 and older level. At a legislative level, at a political level, there are almost 90% of towns that have opted out. Clearly, there's a disconnect between 70% of the voting population that wants it and 90% of the elected population that says no. And that's the conversation that we're looking to bridge. What we recognize is that it's not a one size fits all out here. And you can't just talk to one person and it opens the doors throughout all of Long Island. Long Island is full of all of these building departments and incorporated villages and all of these little fiefdoms throughout Long Island that everyone needs to be tended to and address their concerns. And the rules are slightly different depending on which town you're in. So for us, we recognize that, right? We're not trying to rewrite Long Island here. What we're trying to do is work with those individuals who are in the capacity to make those decisions. So first and foremost, let's educate them, right? Let's make sure that they're making the decisions based on the best information, the most current information, and not reefer madness, right? Like your grandmother and grandfather's cannabis. That's where they're getting a lot of their information from. As I talk to the elected officials out here, oftentimes their responses are just rooted in some of the oldest lines of thought, just very archaic, it's a gateway drug and, things of that nature. We need more data. There are a lot of overdoses of drugs on Long Island. And I'm like, you do realize that cannabis helps and alleviates that problem. When you talk about the public health and safety concerns of cannabis, legal retail cannabis solves those issues and woes. We make them go away. When we talk about fentanyl consumption, contamination inside of cannabis, access of our children to cannabis, the legal cannabis community eliminates that. So what we want to do is make sure that the people who are making the decision have the best information, the most up-to-date information, and they're not rooted in the archaic information that they came up with during their time and their youth. And ultimately, that's what we're seeing, the disconnect. What we also recognize is that in the community, right, there are a lot of people within the community that have that same disconnect, those same concerns, very much rooted in the same way. Long Island is a very affluent community. It's also a much older community, right? And as such, those same concerns exist there. So we want to make sure that as we're educating the towns and educating municipalities, we're also educating the local consumer base and local communities and going in and letting them ask all their questions, right? We let them know that there's no wrong answers here. There are no dumb questions. Ask what you want so we can help you get to this point, right? Because you need to get to a point where we're all dealing with the same information and then we can move forward. So we've been doing that at a large level, and we've been having some success. We've noticed that there are towns that are starting to open up. There are elected officials within those towns that are also asking us to come back and have more conversations. Because at the end of the day, we're advocating for a responsible cannabis industry throughout Long Island. And what we're going to do is connect all of these local communities, all of these business communities, all of these elected officials, all of these state agencies, so that we can create a better awareness and move towards cannabis acceptance here on Long Island. And for us to do that, we know that we have to have a lot of conversations. So we approach it from that point of view, recognizing that we're going to have a lot of these conversations over the course of the next year or 2 or 3. And we're committed to that because we know that's what's going to allow us to open up more locations here on Long Island.
That's awesome. Having grown up in a little town called St. James, a very small little fiefdom.
Nice out there.
I didn't actually realize how conservative the town was. I didn't quite put that together until long after I left. And, after the 2016 election. And that's when I started realizing just what the makeup was. Now, staying on this for a second, that's a tough turn to go from reefer madness to acceptance and understanding that legalization or decriminalization and so on, that it all gets it out of the streets and into a regulated marketplace. The logic doesn't always follow, or it's not a logical argument that you're facing. Sometimes you're facing a very emotional, deep-seated, but largely incorrect set of data. Are you finding that there's a groundswell of folks starting to understand this? Because that, to me, is the only way that this really gets over the hump.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we definitely are seeing that. And what we recognize is, and this is just some of my work in the larger social justice community, right here in New York, a lot of that grassroots work that I do. We're not always going to get people to go from opposition to acceptance. And most of the time you're not. What you're going to get them to do is move one slice over, right? So if this is a pizza pie and we're talking about the 4 slices making up the half. We're asking them to go from one slice to the next slice. We're not necessarily asking them to go all the way across the spectrum, because most people are unwilling to do that. It's going to take them much time and many conversations. But over the course of a short period of time with specific conversations, we can generally move you from staunch opposition into less opposition, and from less opposition into mild acceptance, right? And then from mild acceptance into full-blown acceptance. So that's how we view it. And we recognize sometimes we're just going to get people to move one slice over. And in that way, that's a win, right? That's a win. It takes them away from staunch opposition. It takes them away from, mild resistance into acceptance. And those things help. And it allows us to have better conversations with these individuals, because at the end of the day, this is like, those light bulb moments. You're finally speaking to someone and you realize there's a lot of resistance between you and them, and you just can't find common ground until you do. And in that moment, they're like, wait a minute, I never thought of it that way. Wait a minute, this actually can be a benefit. I'm still not for it, but I see that it's not the monster that I thought it was. And even in that space, I'm happy for someone to get there, because what happens, like I mentioned earlier, Long Island is an older, affluent community. When older people get to the point where they recognize cannabis is not necessarily the monster they thought it was, they then start to view that actually there could be benefits to this thing, and maybe benefits for me. And older people using cannabis for their health benefit oftentimes leads to the most amazing results. And those are the spaces where I'm most excited for people to get to, because even if they're not going to become proponents of cannabis, at least they're going to find ways that cannabis can benefit them in their life, in their health, on their journey for themselves. And that's good enough for me, right? I don't need you to be my best friend. I just need you to be realistic and be better for you, right? And in those spaces, that's where they get to.
100%. You have far more patience than I ever would with this process. So I commend you on that. I don't think I could do it. So thank you for fighting the good fight out there.
Thank you. I appreciate it. We're still at it, right? Every day we're still at it.
I love it. Love it. So, there's 64 licenses and 4 towns that are open, really one. Are you finding that those that are holding licenses have a proprietary sense of their business, or are they more about co-opetition where everybody can win here?
Where everybody
So
can
where everybody can win.
win. Yeah.
All the people with licenses, are they looking at, is it cutthroat or is it partnership driven or somewhere in between?
Yeah, I think so. That conversation is definitely different in different parts of the state, right? In New York, where they're able to get up and go and move, they're definitely viewing competition a little bit more seriously. Whereas on Long Island, we're just looking to open up a door. Right.
Yeah.
And in that way, we haven't even gotten to the competition portion of this conversation yet. Right.
Right.
So I think everybody is still very much, and that lends to the, some of the support and success that we've had, because everyone is finding the same resistance. They realize we can't even talk about competition until we can actively open the door for all of us to have a opportunity to actually open. So there's still very much collaboration, and that's the word of the day out here. Everyone is finding themselves as being helpful in some capacity, and in that way, I think they're approaching the cannabis space as, look, let's open up in the best way and space that we can in this moment. And as we find more opportunity, as we get more places to open up, as more and more prime locations become available, then we can talk about doing bigger, and better the next time, or the third time around. But this first one is really just about opening up in whatever capacity that you possibly can.
Right. I'm going to switch a little bit over to production. So, is there a production? Is there a glut of production, or is there not enough production? So, when somebody opens their doors, are they able to stock their shelves?
Yeah, no, there's plenty of production going on in New York, right? There's a lot more surplus than we're actually selling. So there's that. Here on Long Island, I think we have 13 or so, all right, cultivators out here. So there's a significant amount, and as such, there's more than enough to supply. And when we talk about upstate New York, there's more than enough to supply the shelves at this point in time. Clearly, we're going to need more, and that's why general licensing just opened up, and we're they're looking to get more cultivators in, as well as by the end of the year, the larger ROs start to come in. All of that's absolutely going to be necessary, right? I know there are a couple conversations here, ROs and licensees and how we're supposed to be battling against each other. Regardless of that, though, we're all in the same space and we're all going to be needed, because if we had the ability to open up all of our dispensaries today, we would sell out everything inside New York. There wouldn't be enough.
Right.
And just like that, we're starting to see the reality of, hey, there are some droughts that are in our future
Right.
once we get a chance to open things up. And that's why it is so important to get a lot more production and maybe some of these larger players at the table as well. There's not a single state that has opened up that has excluded ROs or excluded the smaller businesses from opening up. It's a combination of all of it that stands up the industry. And New York is no different. We just have to find the best way to do it.
Absolutely. Other states have opened up cultivation far earlier than retail to allow for production to ramp up, so there weren't empty shelves, and it's worked sometimes. So, how did 13 production facilities open up in conservative Long Island, and you could only get one retail open? Can you talk us through how that worked?
Thankfully, that was part of the MRTA and the regulations coming out from the Office of Cannabis Management. When they put this out for everyone, no one was allowed to opt out of the cannabis industry. And in that way, not a single town could say no at the cultivation level, at the processing level. Where they had the option was at the retail level. This is where we would have wished and hoped that those individuals that were at the table at the very beginning of this would have realized that retail is part of their future, and they could have fought harder for us to have the same opportunities as them. They didn't. At the end of the day, cultivation was protected, processing was protected, but retail wasn't. And what's happening now is those same cultivars and processors that are allowed to open, that are allowed to, build out their product, they recognize that retail, the one portion of the conversation that they didn't move forward, is actually the missing component now. And they're doing a lot more work to get us to the table now and get us to open our doors. This is where foresight is really helpful, when you're starting and launching these things. These emerging market conditions, you really want players who are there, who have some experience and who have larger vision, who can see the bigger picture, not just what's necessary in this moment, and certainly not just what's beneficial for my pockets today. I want to make sure that as I'm having these conversations, I'm not just benefiting my cannabis license that will ultimately open up, but I want to benefit the cannabis industry as a whole. This is retail. This is cultivators. This is processors. These are the ancillary businesses. This is the larger Long Island community. And in that space, as we design our movement forward as a coalition, we're cognizant of all of that. If that conversation would have been there at the beginning, as they were kind of rolling this out, we too would have been protected. Unfortunately, we weren't. So here we are now fighting for our right to exist, right? And Long Island is just a little bit tougher than other parts of the state.
Absolutely. And what was the thinking there? Did they think that there would be this much opposition to retail, or were they blindsided by that? Or is it really just about me getting money? You know what? I don't want you to point fingers. Let's leave that question where it is. Leave it on the table. You could choose to address it somewhere else. Yeah. We don't want to do that. No, we're all friends here. We're all working together. All good. Jumping to where we are today, the CAURD licensees still have so much ambiguity. Like last Friday, there was supposed to be an announcement about the standing and so on. Can you talk us through, firstly, where we are with CAURD and all of that, and general licensing? How does this play out? Does anybody know, or are we all just guessing?
Yeah, I think we're still very much in a space of we're waiting to see how this goes, which is a terrible space to be, by the way, right? For those of us who are spending money in this space, spending time and energy, have walked away from careers, moved into this, fully expecting to move forward and finding all of this resistance. We're all in a space of we don't know. The language is not exactly clear. Oftentimes it is intentionally vague. We're waiting for updates. We don't receive it. Communication is not the best, right? That's been a problem since the beginning of their rollout, and this is statewide. And we're still seeing that now, even through this general licensing. So
Mm.
CAURD clearly, we were created, and there's obviously some protections. The judge in this particular case that's kind of adjudicating what's happening now, he's acknowledged he has no desire to dismantle CAURD. He wants the state and those individuals suing to come to terms and find a deal amongst themselves. He had mentioned the same thing in April when they were talking about the Finger Lakes lawsuit, right?
Mm.
No desire to eliminate CAURD, come to terms, find a solution, and keep it moving. We expect the same thing to happen here. We're just waiting for some type of update. We're waiting for the resolution. We're waiting for someone to tell us, and we aren't getting that exactly. So unfortunately, we're left in this unknown, and as such, we've been recommended to apply again just in case. No one knows what that means, but okay, right? As looking at this thing, just very matter of fact, just like the one in April. This is a lawsuit. It will get settled. The industry will open back up, and we'll be allowed to move forward again. We expect that to happen here. We just don't know when.
Mm.
We also don't know if there's another looming lawsuit, right behind it that's coming in to slow things down again. We just don't know. And in that way, we need some protections. And this is where the state agency has to provide that. But for more than that, right? This is a legislative solution. If they wanted to, they could easily solve that with the Assembly and the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
The governor herself has the ability to solve this with the stroke of a pen, right? So here is where we need more help from those people in power, and that's specifically the legislature and the governor's office. They need to step into this space and provide clarity as well as protection. If they protected CAURD, that's it. We're done. We can no longer be attacked regardless of any lawsuit, and we can just continue to work on opening the doors to retail here in New York. But because we don't have those protections, we're always left at a disadvantage, right?
Mm.
Continue at your own risk. Build out at your own peril. Not exactly sure how this is going to play out. Don't know if you're going to be left waiting again. We're still in that same space today, and we have no more answers today than we did last week, than we did last month. We're still here, and it's very unfortunate and very unfair.
That is quite a roller coaster, and it's tragic, really.
Yeah,
Culture and priorities come from the top. They come from of any organization, even in politics, especially in politics. So the governor, I'm not sure if you want to get into this, and it's cool if you want to sidestep.
You see me sipping my tea. Are we definitely going to share, right?
We'll
let's
just
see
call
what
it
happens.
interesting and step to the side. Okay.
Yeah. Well, first, I think let's go back to the governor for a moment, right?
Yeah.
Because let's go back to that.
Yeah.
She has every ability to solve this. Oftentimes, the conversation, the buck stops at the OCM's door, but in reality, they are not the only players here. They are operating at a deficit themselves, right? They don't have enough money. They don't have enough resource. They don't have enough manpower. They aren't given the power that they needed to do certain things. Oftentimes, they just require that, and they can go ahead and execute, and they can make a big difference in all of our lives in this moment. They just don't have that. And this is where stuff rolls uphill, right? The governor's office is the one that gives them that power. The senators and and the assembly members, those are the ones that provide those opportunity and that funding. Here is where we need them to do more. The governor herself needs to step in and be more proactive in this space. She can't just keep pointing to others and say, and make a quick statement and then leave the space until the next, catastrophe. And right now, that's what's happened. She's acknowledged that there was this turnkey solution that was supposed to be provided. It didn't happen. She acknowledged there was this fund that was getting created. That didn't happen. She acknowledged there was a fund that was strictly for us, social equity applicants. We're still waiting to gain access to it. We have not seen a penny of those things. And as a result, these are things, just like you mentioned, top down. This is where the problem and resolution lies. She's not doing enough, but she has the power to do more. She is not providing enough, but she has the power to provide more. She needs to give the OCM more power, more funding, and the ability to hire more people inside of that office or collaborate with other offices so they could actually do the work of closing illicit shops, providing us with resource and education and opportunity, getting us the funding that we need. We need transparency to this fund. There is money out there that they're collecting from this agency, right? Chicago Atlantic, right? They're the group that came in and they're supposed to be providing the funds. Where and when? They're here, still haven't heard nothing. We are here, still waiting to hear. So we need that information from the governor's office, and we need her to do more and provide that to us, and give it to the OCM. Give them the power and opportunity so they could provide for us. Because the OCM, it's one of the it's like a double-edged sword. They are helping us, and they are a really good group of people that will put together to do so. And at the same time, they're hurting us because they can't quite provide us with the information or the resource that we need. It's not in their power to give that or do that. But if they were to receive that mandate from the governor, they could immediately move forward and do so. If they received codification mandate from the legislature, they could move forward and do so. This is where they need help. And the conversation has to start to shift away from them, not completely, but past them, where it moves to the governor and it moves to the legislature, because this kind of stuff needs to roll uphill and it needs to get to them. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that as well.
I really, really, really appreciate that. So one of the things that we see fairly frequently here in California and in very many states with legacy markets is that there's no enforcement and there's no money given towards enforcement, even though you can see by example that if money is given to enforcement and money is given to pull out licenses, the ROI is there, multifold. And so how does that simple argument go over when you're talking to OCM? I know it's not in their power, but do they recognize, or in general, does the government recognize that if they do prop up the legal industry, it will work? And
absolutely, they know it, they're aware of it, they can't wait for it. But just like we were just discussing, they need the resource and opportunity and manpower to execute it. They are not in a position to do that by themselves as they are today. And this is the Office of Cannabis Management. They require some assistance in order to make those things happen, and they are excited to do so. But they just don't have enough, right? They can't nearly police the entirety of New York, especially without that kind of budget, without that funding, and without that larger coordination. So here on Long Island, enforcement is a major conversation piece, especially for these municipalities and local communities. We don't want cannabis here because there's too much of it going on right now. There are these shops that are open on every corner, and you could see them and walk up to them, and you could access whatever you want, and we don't want it, and we want these things closed. The problem is that, one, they're right, but local law enforcement are not stepping into that space because they realize this is not a criminal matter anymore because cannabis is no longer illegal.
Right.
This is a legislative matter. And as such, other people need to handle it. They can be brought into that and in their own capacity, but it cannot just be a criminal matter that police are solving up and closing up. So they require the OCM for education. They require the governor for resource as well as collaboration. They're just not getting it. So as I was speaking with some of the local law enforcement, some of their heads at the, commissioner level and things of that nature out here on Long Island, one of their concerns were, who do I speak to? Who do I reach out to? Who supports me in this capacity? If I decide to close down and shut something down today, what stops them from opening tomorrow? Right. Are we supposed to go back there and stop them and close them tomorrow? These are some of the things that they want to know, and they're waiting for information. They're waiting for direction. Now, the police commissioner, when he brought that up to me, he said he was receiving that information from his police officers because they were wondering the same thing. Because their community members, their family members are asking them those questions, and they have no answers. They don't know what to tell them about what's allowed and what's not allowed in the cannabis space here on Long Island, let alone rest of New York. And that is top down, right? And this is another one of those moments where we see the governor has the ability to come in and in one fell swoop, she can clean that up, she can support it, she can provide resource. And just like that, we would be opening up dispensaries without having, these illicit shops on the left and right of us. But currently, that's what's happening. When you look at some of the ones in the city, they have illicit shops to the left and right of them. In Long Island, it's a little bit different because we're further spread out. So maybe we're not going to be, having that same, capacity issue, but it still happens out here as well. And it's the same concern. How do we get the enforcement in so this way we can open up more doors? That's the same conversation that is used against us.
Mm-hmm.
Without enforcement, I don't want you guys coming in. Let alone if you have enforcement, here is where we can come in as a retail business, close up the shops around, keep them closed. Only the legal retail shop is open. And there it is. No more access, no more contamination, and no more nuisance crimes as well. This is where all of that is the same conversation that we're having. It's a lot of the same concerns. We're just having it from different directions. And here is where the governor and the legislators have the ability to clarify that for us.
Yeah. About a year ago, I went out to Manhattan just because I needed to see it. I'd been hearing about all these shops that were just open and without any protection. All that I needed to get in there. So there was some conference that I piggybacked on. I went out there with my team and we walked around. And firstly, the legal shops that are open in Manhattan were phenomenal. It was great.
Yeah.
They were great experience, great product selection, and so on. The illegal shops that we went into, I just walked into, I was seeing, firstly, no protections, no security, nothing, like ready for crime. And I saw California products on their shelves with a CA stamp. Nobody is policing them. And I ended up talking to a couple of the owners just while I was there. And one of them was telling me that he was allowed to stay open because he was in process of getting a license. And I was like, well, what's that process? He's like, I don't know. I just tell him that and it's fine. And then I'm like, okay, well, who do you tell that? And he's like, well, anybody that walks in, firstly. And as he was saying that, I saw police cars driving by and it was like, okay, yes, I get it. It's not a criminal thing. It's decriminalized. However, that disconnection between any type of any semblance of order and any semblance of what's right and what's wrong by the law and enforcement of it really made it just drove home how big the barriers are, even when you do get your license and when you do open up your doors. And it's disheartening, but it's also really great to see the success of the store that's open on Long Island. Mm-hmm. And it's a hopeful future. It's a huge market and the people want it. So yeah. I'm hopeful that you'll be able to close a deal with some of these towns and open this up.
Yeah. We're hoping so too. We're definitely finding that is the case. The more conversations we have, the more these elected officials are realizing maybe cannabis is good for us. Where before they started the conversation with absolutely not, over my dead body is what the conversation is with cannabis legalization out here on Long Island. We're now starting to see where the elected officials are asking us to come in. They're recommending we talk to others, and they're saying, hey, maybe there's room in this conversation for us to open up. Maybe not all in one fell swoop, but maybe we can incrementally open up. And sure enough, as a result, we're seeing Brookhaven come to that conversation, and they're looking to potentially open up some locations to make it a little bit more viable for businesses to open. We're also seeing a town like Babylon furthering their openings. They're creating less restrictions on their residential setbacks, giving us more opportunity to find commercial locations to potentially open up. Since we've been talking to them, we've had success. We are invited into Riverhead recently, and we're having those conversations. We get it. We're happy to do the hard work of it, but it is the hard work of it. As you were mentioning, walking into that store and speaking to some of those owners, this is where, talk is cheap. It doesn't cost a thing to say anything, right? No, he's not in compliance. No, he's not allowed to do that. And no, that's not allowed. You can't be open unless you're legal and you're fully compliant, and they're not. This is where enforcement. It's real easy for a lot of these police officers that are walking by, driving by, standing at this, very corner that these things are open, to walk in and close it down and keep it closed if they had the mandate, if they had the power to do so, if they had the education and training and partnership and collaboration throughout the state to keep it closed and to identify them. This is where the conversation has to be top down in order for that to get resolved. And that's how simple it is. It's not a hard fix. And the buck stops at the governor's desk and it stops at the legislature's office. That's where that buck stops.
I really appreciate that and everything you've said. If there's one thing you can tell people about how they can get involved and help move this conversation forward, what would that be?
Yeah, it's really reach out to to local organizations in your area that are doing this work. Very rarely do we have to recreate the wheel, right? They're already created, they're already out there, some better than others, but it's a wheel and it's already there. Find those agencies and organizations that are in your community that are doing the work that you would like to be part of and go help them. Become a member, donate and support, volunteer in some capacity. You're going to find that that little bit of work that you can help contribute really does go a long way. Because as a nonprofit, very few organizations in the United States know how to stretch a dollar and stretch resource more than a nonprofit does, right? We know how to take help and turn it into a mile of help. We know how to take that dollar and turn it into $1 of help, right? A mile of help. We know what that looks like, and as such, for people who want to, longislandcc.org, right? Go on the site, sign up, become a member. You'll start to be part of our regular communication. You'll find out where we're going, what we're doing next, who we're talking to, how you can help, the information that matters to you specifically on Long Island. And then there are other agencies throughout the state as well, state organizations that in the city or upstate that you can tie yourself to and get involved with and still do that work in your neighborhood. Because at the end of the day, each one of us needs to show up. Each one of us needs to contribute. And it's only through this larger effort that we're going to create the resolution that we need.
Absolutely. I'm sure you don't hear this a lot, but thank you for fighting the good fight,
Thank
really,
you. I
and
appreciate it.
broadening
I
the
appreciate it.
market. It's the cannabis market faces a lot of headwinds, and having people like you spearheading through those, it makes a huge difference. So thank you on behalf of everybody that's not on Long Island for helping open up the market and open up the minds and for continuing to evolve this industry. So thank you.
Thank you
Um,
very much. I appreciate that.
Gahrey Ovalle, thank you for joining us today with LICC. It's really been a pleasure getting to know you, getting to know the market, and having this conversation. Thanks for the time today.
Absolutely. Eric, thank you again. It was great talking to you, and I'm sure we'll do this again soon.
Oh, absolutely. All right. Take care. Happy Thanksgiving.
You as well.
Thanks.